It's about safety, and it's about the motivation of our heart of why we're enforcing a boundary. It's for your protection. It's not for the other person's punishment. Setting boundaries is what emotionally healthy people do. It shows good, strong emotional health.
Boundaries. Over the years, I've heard many overwhelmed mothers talk about how they need to establish boundaries, how they should be establishing better boundaries for themselves, for their children, maybe even for the in-laws. Unfortunately, many of us have not been taught what healthy boundaries look like, feel like, and therefore we don't know how to set them. As a mom of a 9-year-old angry boy, I oftentimes sat and took his barrage of insults and his anger because I thought I was being loving by staying present with him. It wasn't until I decided to be transparent with a mentor friend of mine and share about my own emotional exhaustion of being present with this barrage of insults day after day that things began to change. We explored other ways to incorporate healthy boundaries for my own heart so that I could parent from a place of peace and calm. Marvelous Mom, perhaps you find yourself in a similar situation as I was those years ago in trying to deal with anger or rage from a child. You might still be wandering around in a violated land where you feel taken advantage of, maybe in friendships, marriage, or in parenting, like I was. Oftentimes, we've been informed by good-meaning clergy that we are to be selfless, submissive, sacrificial, and we've allowed these messages to keep us from honoring ourselves and those around us. Boundaries show love. They show love for ourselves, and they show love for others. Hey there, Misty Hughes here with Mom2Mom Mentoring. While I am your gratitude guide and your celebration coach, I humbly admit that a boundary boss I am not. I'm still learning. I'm still growing. And I am excited to share with you a conversation that I recently had with Misty Terrell. Now, if you haven't met her yet, I encourage you to go back and listen to episode number 14, Do I Suffer from Betrayal Trauma? You'll soon discover that Misty is an expert in the area of trauma recovery, which includes, as you might guess, boundaries. Misty and I will be referring to that episode during today's conversation. Misty has so much wisdom and is a real mom mentor in this area of boundaries. Misty and I had an in-depth conversation regarding boundaries because they are so important. Whether you're healing from trauma or just wanting to gain more clarity and control in your life and quit feeling so overwhelmed, Misty's conversation with me today will be very inspiring. It was very eye-opening and enlightening for me. God has used that conversation as I've reflected back on my own life in areas where boundaries weren't what they should have been. You know, one of the things that I have come to really love about Misty is her transparency. Today's conversation is just that. So, if you've got little ears around right now, I encourage you to pause this podcast until those precious pumpkins aren't within earshot. However, you might think about age-appropriate conversations to have with your children concerning some of the things that we discussed last week and today. Oh, and Marvelous Mom, be sure to share this podcast episode with your mom friends. We could all be more educated in the freedom that boundaries provide for us and others. Misty, in your book Rise, you give women permission to establish boundaries. In fact, there's freedom to make a choice that boundaries are a good thing. Sometimes growing up in the church, women have learned that boundaries, especially establishing boundaries with their husbands, is not a very loving thing to do. In fact, I remember sitting in the counselor's office after I had learned about my ex-husband's porn addiction and infidelity, feeling apologetic for wanting to establish boundaries with him. But boundaries are biblical. David in Psalm 16 even talks about the boundary lines that have fallen for him in pleasant places. I mean, that sounds like a very positive way to look at boundaries. So I am looking forward to our conversation today about boundaries. I want to hear what boundaries did for you in your journey, and even what boundaries did for Jim. And Misty, I look forward to hearing how you got to the place where you unashamedly were able to set boundaries. I mean, there had to be a wrestle in that.
I love the verse that says, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think we forget those last two words, as yourself. And boundaries is a way for you to love yourself. Boundaries is really one of the most important things. And then when you implement them, you're loving others as well. It's an expression of love. And I don't think we really highlight that boundaries is love towards yourself and towards others. Whether you choose to stay in the marriage or not, boundaring up. And there's a great book by Cloud and Townsend called Boundaries. That's a very popular book, and that can help too.
So I've taught the boundaries class and went through that. It was key in my early days of recovery. But one thing I realized in the process of the whole boundaries topic was boundaries had to come from inside my heart. And I could establish that fence. That was a good starting place. But if I wasn't attached with the fearful and wonderful way that I was created, loved, and delighted in, the external boundaries would only take me so far. It had to be from that place of loving myself that the boundaries had to flow from.
Yes, I agree.
I think sometimes we don't feel like we're worthy of feeling safe.
I agree. I do believe that a lot of the teachings within the church, and I love the church, we are Jesus followers, but unfortunately, we were raised in a very legalistic, fundamentalist church. So I did not go to a healthy, balanced church growing up. We were both raised in legalism. And for me, for sure, I was conditioned. Like setting a boundary would have been like I was a terrible wife and a terrible human being. So I had to unpack some of the false teaching that I was raised in. That happened when my brain was developing. So it really became a part of my identity. Like I'm not allowed to say no. I'm a people pleaser in recovery. I was conditioned to think that my number one job is just to take care of everybody else and I'm the last priority. And so flipping that script and rewriting it was really empowering to me, and it helped me find my voice. Like you said, it's about safety, and it's about the motivation of our heart of why we're enforcing a boundary. It's for your protection. It's not for the other person's punishment. That was never my motive. And when I interviewed my husband for my book and asked him, how did you feel when I said, okay, here's some boundaries that I would like to set so that I feel safe? I'll just give you one example. Because he acted out on his phone, that was his main source of viewing pornography. I knew he would do it when he would go to the bathroom. He would take the phone into the bathroom with him. And then at night, after I was asleep, he would get on his phone and view pornography. So it felt safe for me in the beginning stages of recovery. I want your phone on my nightstand every night or in another room, and no looking at the phone once I go to sleep. And then number two, no phones in the bathroom. Now, he could have responded like, I'm not a child, but he knew that because I communicated with him, this is not because I'm punishing you. It's because that triggers a cascade of doubt and reactions in my mind that you're viewing porn again, you're relapsing. I just freak out. And until we get a little more further into recovery, that's just what I need. He has loved that boundary. It's just something that he really embraced. Even 7 years, he still puts his phone on my nightstand, and I don't even need it anymore. I don't need him to do that anymore. But remember, I told you the Torah repentance where they add 20%. That's him going above and beyond. Okay, she needed that. She doesn't need that now, but now I want to pay for the repair. That's just an example of coming from a place of protection, not punishment. So that's number one. Number two, setting boundaries is what emotionally healthy people do. I mean, this is not something that a dysfunctional person is going to do. They're going to not want to have boundaries. It doesn't have to be major things. It could be very simple things with people. It shows good, strong emotional health when you are able to set boundaries and have a a voice. When you set a boundary, you use an if then statement, you always want to make sure there's a consequence with it. So
Okay.
sometimes we'll be like, here's my boundary. You can't look at your phone after you go to sleep. Okay. So what if he does? What's going to happen? So taking the time to get that last part, the if then. So if you get on your phone after I fall asleep and I wake up and I see you on your phone, then come up with a consequence. I liked to do consequences that pushed my husband further into recovery. Like, you need to have counseling sessions and you need to retake a polygraph. We need to revisit that because now I'm unsafe again. I can't believe your words because we've already established with compulsive liars, we have to go by their actions, and that action was deceitful. Maybe it's if you get on Facebook and scroll and just objectify women, then we have to have an in-house separation until you have enough counseling sessions to be able to tell me why you did that, what feelings you were feeling. They're going to start discovering more about themselves and the why they're doing those things. And that makes me feel safer, because if you know why and you get to a place where you're self-aware enough that you're spiraling emotionally, then that's prevention. That will keep you from going to porn. So boundaries should have an if then.
Then these are the consequences of that action, right?
Yeah.
I had a good friend during my separation and divorce that would always use that language regarding my husband. She'd tell me over and over, Misty, these are the consequences of his actions. This idea of the if then would be easy to incorporate with children.
Right?
Yeah.
In fact, I think I naturally learned to do this with my kids. I wanted them to clearly understand the idea of consequences. So I would incorporate this idea in simple things like going to the store. If you behave in the store and don't bug me to buy everything, then you can buy a piece of candy when we go through checkout. Oh my gosh, when I didn't say those words, grocery shopping was a nightmare. I had to say no to everything, and it was so exhausting. If this happens, then these are the consequences of that action. Is really a healthy thing that we can incorporate in establishing boundaries with our children.
And you can't force them to fulfill the consequence, right? If I say, if you do this, then you need to sleep in the guest room because I cannot handle being in the same bed with you right now.
Uh-huh.
And they're like, I'm not sleeping in the guest room. This is a power struggle now, right? This is a power over. I need to take my power back. So I'm totally unsafe sleeping in the bed with him. So it might suck and it might be unfair, but I can go sleep in the guest bed. Sometimes I slept even on our bedroom floor. If I found a night where I was just tossing and turning and I identified, oh, I think my nervous system is feeling really unsafe, I'd sleep on the floor. Sure, I could have woken him up and be like, you have caused me to feel this way, you're asleep, but that's coming from a place of punishment, right?
Okay.
My mentality was, how can I take my power back? That's another thing that boundaries do. They help you take your power back because they have had all that power. The offender has had all this power. Your part of recovery is learning how to take it back. Boundaries is a really great way to start doing that. It's very empowering.
You said actions speak louder than words. When you begin to establish boundaries, their response to those boundaries will probably speak something.
Absolutely. It is very revealing, which is very helpful for you because you're trying to figure out, is my man really in recovery? Is he really repentant? When they submit to your boundary, even if they don't agree, that there was boundaries my husband maybe didn't fully understand of how that was helping me, but he didn't care because he was so all in to becoming a safe man for me. Whatever you need, I will do whatever you need. If that's what you need, I'm all in. His response to my boundaries was another reason why I continue to choose to stay.
That is a powerful statement. I continue to choose to stay. What might be a response of a woman who is continually trying to establish and maintain boundaries with someone who is not responding well to her boundaries?
women will go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? Some will want to run from the relationship when they find out about betrayal. Some will like have a hard time, they freeze. And so they just stay in it because they are afraid to believe. For me, my natural reaction is I wanted out, Misty. I am so ultra independent. That is me. Like, I don't need no man. I own my own business. I can stand on my own 2 feet. I have no problem being on my own. So for me, staying was opposite my natural tendency to run because my stress response was to run. Time will tell. I always say time will tell.
Misty, in the last episode, you mentioned a foolish man versus an evil man and indicated that Jim fell into the category of foolish. So he is walking out repentance and learning how to provide safety for you. What if a woman is dealing with someone who is not so willing?
I do want to say, even though boundaries are very empowering, I do want to reiterate that if they are an evil person and have the heart of an abuser, when you set boundaries, it will not go well.
Okay.
They will further inflict abuse and harm. So in some situations, women may have to come up with a different kind of boundary setting to keep them safe. They have just different strategy. And I just think you always have to work with a therapist or the abuse hotline to come up with that. You have to go into protection mode because they're just a very unsafe person for you. The whole strategy becomes different. It's just to keep yourself safe. I want to touch on something that you said too, because I think it's really important. Men that are, I'll just call religious because they're not Jesus followers by any stretch of the imagination. But these religious men grow up knowing porn is wrong, right? They know porn is wrong. And so some of them will not watch porn because they know it's bad, but they'll take that energy and they'll direct it towards their wife. So they will objectify her. There's marital rape. There will not be mutual consent. They will push very heavily for obligation sex. And if a woman does not have the freedom and the safety to say no to sex, then she's not really saying yes. Not only are men telling their wives, you're obligated to give me that. So there's an ugly spirit of entitlement.
Yeah.
But women raised in religion, we're conditioned to think we're supposed to offer it and that we're not allowed to say no. So it can be really dangerous and destructive and harmful. So we have to unpack all of that and really look at what is healthy sexuality.
And as we've learned, safety is the number one priority. Misty, we've talked a lot about boundaries that we establish to re-establish that safety. We've been talking mainly about boundaries as they pertain to dealing with betrayal trauma, which again we discussed in episode 14. However, you said that boundaries, or the ability to establish and maintain boundaries, is an indication of emotional health, whether that is our boundaries with our abuser or simply boundaries we need to establish in our home with our children because we love them. But what about me? What's my responsibility?
There's two types of boundaries. There's personal boundaries. So an example of a personal boundary is I can't control my husband's response, but I can control mine. That means I can stay calm and firmly state my needs and desires in a calm way. That's a personal boundary. The if then is relational boundaries. So an example of a relational boundary, I will sleep alone in our bed or in the guest room if you choose to use porn or if you act out your pornographic fantasies on me. So if you look at porn, then I will remove myself from the marriage bed in some way, or I'll ask you to go sleep in the guest room, however you want to do it. So there's personal boundaries and relational boundaries.
So, Misty, where are you and Jim at in your recovery journey?
It's really fun to talk about because, okay, so we're 7 years of therapy, 7 years of support groups, 7 years accountabilities. Jim did multiple 12 steps. He didn't just do it once. He did, I don't even know how many times he went through it. So where we are now is we are people helpers. We've started a nonprofit, and to try to make resources more accessible, we hope to continue to grow that so we can even help offset the cost of therapy. If you want, I'll get very specific.
Yes.
We're working on reclaiming our sexuality right now. It's so funny. I'm like, why is it that you're learning about sex addiction? All of us are in these accountability groups and no one's talking about sex. I just think that's so ironic. Like, you had dysfunctional sexual patterns for us 17 years. So how do we that and discover what healthy sexuality is for men, for women, and then together as a couple? So that's where we are right now. I've actually been working on reclaiming my sexuality since 2020. I'm 4 years of intentional work in reclaiming my sexuality because it's such grueling work. And a lot of women dissociate during physical intimacy because that has been your coping mechanism, your body's response to an unsafe situation. So what's happening now is my brain knows I'm safe, but my body is still disconnecting. It's like not catching up with my reality. That is complex trauma. That's where we are currently. To be specific, I would say our relationship is better, so much healthier than it ever was. And that's just because we are doing the work that we needed to do, both individually and then collectively.
Where do you want to be 3 years from now?
I'm hoping to write book number 2 on reclaiming sexuality after betrayal and sex addiction. So I would like to have another book published, but I just want to continue to learn more about who Misty is. I feel like we're newlyweds because we're having to, for the first time, live in true authenticity and transparency. And so we're really students of each other. So hopefully I have just a deeper understanding of myself and a much deeper understanding of Jim, my husband.
Beautiful. Lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Women are going to want to go deeper,
Sure.
probably get in touch with you. What's that best way to do that?
So there's multiple avenues you can do that. I would say if you want to contact me, you can go to my website, which is rise2heal.com. You see a support group link, click on that, submit an email. And then if they want resources for their spouse, that is possible too. You can also get in touch with me through our nonprofit website, which is AZER, which is EZER alliance.org. The EzerAlliance.org. Ezer is a Hebrew root word in Genesis, where when God created women and said she is his helper, Ezer or Azer actually is a word used throughout scripture. God describes himself as Azer or Ezer, and it means warrior. So it's like someone who comes in and fights battles beside somebody else. They help fight your battles.
I know. It's military ally.
Yes.
That means I'm bringing all of my strength. It's not a
Subservient.
hierarchy at all.
No.
Like,
Nope.
there is no head.
And yeah, that's a whole other topic.
Well, as you can see, Misty and I have a whole lot more to discuss here on Mom to Mom Mentoring. I hope you enjoyed this conversation on boundaries and gleaned as much as I did from Misty's wisdom and understanding. Marvelous Mama's boundaries are an emotional, healthy expression of love for yourself and for others. If you are finding it difficult to set or maintain boundaries in your own life, whether it's with your spouse, children, or even yourself, you are not alone. It can be challenging to navigate these waters, but you don't have to do it alone. I would love to walk alongside of you as your coach, helping you live, lead, and love from a thriving heart. Let's work together to build those healthy boundaries that bring peace and protection into your life. You can reach out to me at Mom2MomMentoring.com to start a conversation. I'm here to support you on this journey. Remember, establishing boundaries is not about pushing people away. It's about protecting the space where you and your relationships can flourish. Until next time, stay strong, stay empowered, and keep loving well. Take care, Marvelous Mom.